champagne bottle shattered against marble. Glass exploded across the terrace of Redwood Commons, spraying the polished shoes of investors who scrambled backward, shouting in surprise. Someone screamed. Security moved through the crowd. But Seo Ji-Hoon didn't flinch. 3/4 of his eyes were locked onto something across the plaza that made his blood stop cold. A woman's laugh cut through the chaos, familiar and impossible. And when he turned his head toward the sound, the world tilted off its axis. She stood beside a small catering truck, head thrown back in genuine joy, surrounded by 3 children who looked eerily identical. 3 pairs of eyes, 3 faces that mirrored each other with uncanny precision. Triplets, and one of them, with round cheeks and curious eyes, broke free from her grip and toddled directly toward him through the crowd. Tiny fingers wrapped around Ji-Hoon's index finger with startling strength. The child looked up at him and smiled. Ji-Hoon's throat closed. Those were his eyes staring back at him. His DNA, his blood, his children, triplets he never knew existed. 5 years ago, he'd walked away from Imani Clarke believing she betrayed him, and now the evidence of what he'd abandoned stood 3 feet tall, holding his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Imani's head snapped toward them. Her smile died instantly, replaced by something cold and sharp enough to draw blood. Before you even catch your breath, pause for a second. Hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and smash that like button, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about second chances. She crossed the distance in 4 strides, scooped Eli into her arms, and positioned herself between Ji-Hoon and the other 2 children like a human shield. Her voice, when it came, was low and lethal. Back away from my son. Not our son. My son. The possessor burned through Ji-Hoon's chest. He released Eli's fingers slowly, hands rising a gesture of peace that felt absurd given the fury radiating from the woman he'd once loved, the woman he'd destroyed. Imani, I need to explain. No. She cut him off with surgical precision. You don't get to say my name. You don't get to look at them. You don't get anything. Caleb stepped forward with his small fists clenched, positioned protectively beside his mother, while Zuri pressed close behind him. The triplets moved as a unit, connected in ways that went beyond sibling bonds. Mom, who is he? Caleb demanded. Ji-Hoon watched his sons, his identical sons, glare at him with justified suspicion, while his daughter peered around her brothers with wide, wary eyes. He felt something crack inside his chest. He wanted to kneel down, to explain, to beg, but Imani's expression promised violence if he tried. Around them, the business launch continued obliviously. Champagne flowed. Investors networked. Cameras flashed. His fiancée, Urahan, would be searching for him soon, wondering why he'd vanished mid-event, why he was standing frozen in the middle of the plaza like someone had driven a knife between his ribs. But Ji-Hoon couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stare at the family he never knew he had. Imani's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted Eli on her hip, and Ji-Hoon saw her fighting for control, saw the years of anger and hurt and survival written in every tense line of her body. Caleb, take your sister back to the truck. Now. But Caleb's eyes stayed fixed on Ji-Hoon, wary and protective, his hand finding Zuri's automatically. The kids moved together instinctively, a tight formation born of years protecting each other. Now. Her tone left no room for argument, sharp with maternal authority. Caleb pulled his sister, the two of them glancing back with matching expressions of wide-eyed uncertainty, sensing something monumental happening even if they didn't understand what. When they were out of earshot, safely back by the catering truck, where they huddled together in a protective cluster, Imani turned the full force of her rage on Ji-Hoon. You have 10 seconds to walk away before I start screaming for security and tell everyone here exactly who you are. I didn't know, Ji-Hoon said, voice rough with shock. Triplets. You were carrying triplets when I left. You didn't know? Imani's laugh was broken glass and gasoline. You didn't know because you didn't care enough to ask. You didn't know because the second your family whispered poison in your ear, you believed them instead of me. You chose their lies over 5 years of us. 5 years ago crashed back with brutal clarity. The bank statements his father had shown him, spread across a mahogany desk like evidence at a trial. Transfers from Ji-Hoon's private account to one bearing Imani's name. $50,000, then 100,000, then more, accumulating over months. The photo of Imani having coffee with Park Min-suk, his family's biggest competitor, leaning close in conversation that looked intimate. The testimony from Sarah, Imani's former roommate, claiming Imani had bragged about manipulating the naive rich boy, about securing her future through seduction and strategy. He confronted Imani in their shared apartment that night, throwing the evidence on the table like an accusation, like a weapon designed to wound. She'd stare at the papers in confusion, then horror, then fury that matched what burned in her eyes now. You actually think I would steal from you? Imani had whispered that night, voice breaking. The proof is right there. Ji-Hoon had said coldly, pointing at the bank statements with shaking hands. The transfers, the meetings with Park. Sarah confirmed everything. She said you were using me. Sarah? Imani's voice had cracked. You're trusting Sarah over me? Sarah, who I fired as my roommate because she stole from me? Sarah, who's been bitter ever since. I'm trusting evidence. Numbers don't lie. Photos don't lie. Then you never trusted me at all. She looked at him with something worse than hatred, disappointment, devastation, the death of love in real time. You're exactly who they warned me about. Ji-Hoon had said, the words designed to cut, designed to make her hurt the way he hurt. And they had. He'd watched Imani's face go blank, watched her spine straighten with the kind of dignity that only comes from having nothing left to lose, from realizing the person you loved never really knew you at all. You believed them because it was easier than believing in me, she'd whispered. Then she'd walked out. He'd let her go, standing in the apartment they'd shared, surrounded by evidence that felt like truth and turned out to be lies constructed by people who value control over love. Now, standing in Redwood Commons with his unknown triplets 20 feet away, Ji-Hoon finally understood the magnitude of what he'd destroyed. I was pregnant with triplets, Imani said now, voice shaking with barely controlled fury, with 4 years of raising 3 babies alone. I found out 2 weeks after you threw me away like garbage. 3 babies at once, Ji-Hoon. High-risk pregnancy. Bed rest. Terror every single day that I'd lose them. I tried calling, texting. I tried to tell you I needed help. You blocked me everywhere. Every number. Every email. You erased me like I never existed. Ji-Hoon's hands curled into fists at his sides, nails digging into palms hard enough to hurt. If I had known... What? You would have come back? Taken responsibility? Imani's eyes blazed with rage and pain so raw it felt physical. You chose cruelty over conversation. You chose your family's lives over 5 years of us. You don't get to rewrite that now because reality got inconvenient. Eli squirmed in her arms, reaching for Ji-Hoon again with chubby fingers, innocent of the tension crackling between the adults. "Dada," the toddler said hopefully, the word casual and devastating. The word was a knife between Ji-Hoon's ribs, twisting. His son, one of three identical children who'd grown up without knowing their father's name. Imani turned away, shielding Eli from view with her body. Don't you dare respond to that. You're not their father. Biology doesn't make you a father. Imani, please, just let me. Stay away from us. Her voice broke on the last word, fracturing into something raw and wounded. I mean it. We survived without you for 5 years. 3 babies at once, and I did it alone. We'll keep surviving. She walked toward the catering truck without looking back, spine straight despite the trembling in her shoulders. The triplets immediately surrounded her when she reached them, 3 identical faces showing concern for their mother. Ji-Hoon stood frozen in the middle of the plaza as the truth he'd been running from for 5 years finally caught him. He'd been wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. And the price of his pride was 3 children, born together, raised together as an inseparable unit, who didn't know his name, who'd grown up without a father because he'd been too arrogant to question, too proud to verify, too controlled by family to choose love. Behind him, Yura's voice cut through his paralysis, cool and measured. So that's her. Ji-Hoon turned to find his fiancée standing 3 feet away, champagne flute in hand, face carefully neutral, but eyes sharp intelligence that missed nothing. She'd changed from the woman he'd left at the bar, now assessing the situation with the same precision she brought to corporate negotiations. Yura, I can explain. Can you? She took a sip, eyes tracking Imani's retreat across the plaza, cataloging details with visible calculation. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just discovered you have triplets with your ex-girlfriend. Is that about right? There was no point in lying. Yura was too intelligent for lies, too observant to be deceived by deflection. Yes, I see. She set down her glass with precise control, the kind of measured movement that preceded either explosion or ice. And you were planning to tell me when exactly? I just found out myself. 2 minutes ago. How convenient. Yura's smile was razor-thin, cutting. Do they know about me? About us? About our engagement? I don't think she cares about any of that right now. Oh, she cares. Yura's gaze was clinical, dissecting. Did you see the way she looked at you? That's not indifference. Ji-Hoon, that's someone who loved you enough to hate you properly. That's someone who built armor from pain. Ji-Hoon said nothing because what could he say? What words existed to explain the situation to his fiancée, to the woman he'd promised to marry in 6 months, to the merger between 2 families that depended on their union? We need to leave, Yura continued, voice low and controlled. Now, before this becomes a scene that makes tomorrow's business news. I can't just walk away from. You can and you will. She linked her arm through his with practiced ease, all appearance of the perfect couple maintained for watching eyes. Smile. Wave. We're going to walk out of here like nothing happened, and then you're going to tell me everything. Every detail. Every secret. Do you understand? The steel in her voice left no room for argument. The drive back to Ji-Hoon's penthouse was silent, tension thick enough to choke on. Yura stared out the window, face unreadable, while Ji-Hoon gripped the steering wheel and tried to process the fact that he was a father to triplets. 3 children who existed because of him, who'd been born together, who'd grown and learned and lived for years as an inseparable unit without his knowledge, without his support, without his presence. The guilt was suffocating, pressing down on his chest like physical weight. They reached the penthouse. Yura poured herself wine with steady hands. Ji-Hoon stood in the middle of his sterile living room and waited for the explosion, for the anger he deserved, for the end of everything they built together. It didn't come. Instead, Yura sat down, crossed her legs, and said, "Tell me." So he did. He told her about Imani, about meeting her at a charity event 5 years ago where she'd been catering, about the relationship that had felt like the first real thing in his carefully controlled life, about falling in love with someone who saw him as Ji-Hoon, not as a CEO heir, not as a business asset, not as a strategic alliance, about his family's intervention, swift and brutal, about the fabricated evidence he'd been too proud and too stupid to question, too controlled by family loyalty to verify, about walking away without looking back, cutting Imani out of his life with surgical precision, about 5 years of believing he'd been right, of convincing himself the evidence was real, of building a life that looked successful on paper and felt hollow underneath. "And now you know you weren't right," Yura said when he finished, voice carefully neutral. "Now I know I destroyed everything that mattered." Ji-Hoon's voice was raw. "I destroyed her. I destroyed us. I destroyed the chance to be a father to my children, to triplets, Yura. She went through a high-risk pregnancy alone." Dramatic. She swirled her wine, watching the liquid catch light, but probably accurate. She studied him for a long moment, and Ji-Hoon saw her mind working, saw her calculating angles and consequences with the same strategic brilliance that had made her family's company thrive. "Are they yours? Definitely yours? Not just convenient timing." Yes, Ji-Hoon had no doubt. Those identical faces, those eyes, the way they moved together like parts of a whole. "I saw them. They're mine. All 3 of them." "Then you have a problem." Her tone was matter-of-fact, clinical. "I know." "No, I don't think you do." Yura set down her glass with audible click against marble. "Let me explain your problem in terms you'll understand. We've been engaged for 2 years. 2 years of playing the perfect corporate couple for cameras and shareholders. 2 years of merger discussions between our families, of building something bigger than both companies separately. 2 years of me pretending I don't know this engagement is purely strategic, that you don't love me and I don't love you, but we could build something functional and stable." I'm not finished." Her voice stayed level, but something sharp glinted in her eyes, something wounded beneath the ice. "I agreed to marry you knowing you didn't love me. I made peace with that because I'm pragmatic, because our marriage makes business sense, because I thought we could build something functional and stable and successful even without love. I thought we understood each other." She stood, pacing to the window, looking out at the city lights below. "But this, triplets you didn't know about, an ex-girlfriend you clearly still have feelings for, this humiliates me, Ji-Hoon. This makes me look like a fool. This makes me collateral damage in your personal drama. That wasn't my intention." The words felt inadequate, hollow. "Your intentions are irrelevant." Yura turned to face him, backlit by city lights, expression carved from marble. "Here's what matters. If you choose them, if you choose her and those triplets, you lose everything. Your family will disown you. Our family's merger falls through. Billions in projected value evaporate. You'll be cut off from the empire you spent your entire life building, from the company that bears your family name. They're my children," June said, the word simple and absolute. "Triplets you didn't know existed until an hour ago." Yura's tone was clinical, surgical. 3 children whose mother wants nothing to do with you. 3 children you abandoned, even if unintentionally. What makes you think you have any right to them now? Because they're mine. Because I owe them 5 years of support. Because you feel guilty. Yura's words cut clean. Guilt isn't a foundation for fatherhood. Guilt fades. Then what? When the novelty wears off, and you remember you have board meetings and international deals, and a company to run, when you realize raising triplets is 3 times the work you imagined, that won't happen. But even as Ji-Hoon said it, doubt crept in like poison. You don't know that. You can't promise that. She moved closer, and he saw something complicated in her expression, not just anger. Something that looked almost like concern. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be realistic. You failed her once, Ji-Hoon. Catastrophically. What makes you think you won't fail them? The question hit like a physical blow because Ji-Hoon had been asking himself the same thing since seeing Imani's face, since watching his sons glare at him with justified suspicion, since seeing his daughter's wary eyes, since holding one toddler's hand for 5 precious seconds, while knowing he had 2 others he'd never touched. What made him think he deserved a second chance? What made him think he was capable of being the father those triplets needed after everything he'd done, after the choice he'd made 5 years ago? Yura watched the doubt play across his face and nodded slowly, something sad in the gesture. That's what I thought. You're not ready. You're responding to shock and guilt, not to genuine commitment. She collected her purse, movements precise and controlled. I need time to think, to decide what I'm going to do with this information, how to handle the merger, how to explain this to my family. Yura, please. Don't. She held up one hand, palm out like a barrier. I won't expose this. Yet. But understand something clearly. If you pursue this, if you choose him over everything we built, I won't protect you either. You'll face the consequences alone. Your family, the board, the shareholders, all of it. You'll lose everything. The door closed behind her with quiet finality, and the click of the lock sounded like a cell door slamming shut. Ji-Hoon stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by expensive furniture that suddenly looked like stage props, like items carefully selected to project success and wealth and control, all surface with no substance underneath. He walked to the window and stared out at the city, at lights stretching in every direction, and realized he'd spent 5 years building a life that meant nothing without the people he'd abandoned. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. Mandatory attendance. Your father insists. Ji-Hoon stared at the message and knew exactly what it meant. His father had found out about Redwood Commons, about Imani, about the triplets. The summons was coming. The reckoning he'd avoided for 5 years was finally here. He should have been terrified. Should have been calculating damage control. Should have been preparing his defense, his explanations, his strategic retreat. Instead, Ji-Hoon found himself thinking about tiny fingers wrapped around his hand, about 2 pairs of suspicious glares from identical faces, about a little girl's wary eyes, about a toddler saying "Dada" with innocent hope, about the woman who'd survived 5 years alone raising triplets because he'd been too proud to question, too controlled to trust, too weak to choose love over fear. He picked up his phone and started typing, ignoring the board meeting summons, ignoring the consequences piling up like storm clouds. He hired the best private investigator in the city with instructions that were simple and absolute. Find out everything about Imani Clarke's life for the past 5 years, where she lived, how she survived, what the triplets needed, not to find leverage, not to find weakness, but to understand reality of what his pride had cost, to see clearly what he'd forced her to build alone with 3 babies. The investigator's report arrived 48 hours later, delivered in a manila envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Ji-Hoon sat in his home office and forced himself to read every page, every detail, every piece of evidence of Imani's struggle. She lived in Billionaire District, a crumbling waterfront neighborhood where buildings leaned and hope died slowly. Rent was $1,200 a month for a two-bedroom apartment with unreliable heat and a refrigerator that worked in intervals. She ran a catering business out of her apartment kitchen, working 16-hour days to keep food on the table, building a client base one corporate lunch at a time. The triplets attended an underfunded public school where teachers were overworked and resources were scarce. Medical records showed all three had been hospitalized at various points. Eli twice for asthma attacks, Caleb once for a severe allergic reaction, Zuri once for pneumonia, each time with Imani scrambling to cover costs that insurance barely touched. The report noted developmental concerns. Caleb showed signs of undiagnosed dyslexia that no one had caught because the school didn't have resources for testing. Zuri exhibited anxiety that manifested in selective mutism at school, speaking freely at home but going silent in classroom settings from stress. Eli's asthma required medication they sometimes couldn't afford. But the worst part was the social services file, stamped with official seals and bureaucratic language that couldn't hide the threat underneath. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint 3 months ago about living conditions. Inadequate space for triplets in a two-bedroom apartment. Inconsistent income. Safety concerns about the neighborhood. A caseworker had been assigned. Follow-up visits scheduled. Evaluation pending. The investigators' notes were clinical but damning. Raising triplets alone in poverty was flagged as high risk. One bad month. One missed rent payment. One emergency that drained savings. Any of it could tip the balance. Could result in temporary foster placement, while Imani proved stability. Could separate her from the triplets she'd raised alone for 5 years, splitting them into different homes because finding foster placements for 3 identical children together was nearly impossible. Ji-Hoon read the report 3 times, each time finding new ways to hate himself, new details that illustrated exactly what his choice had cost. The triplets shared a single bedroom, shared clothes, shared everything because there wasn't enough of anything. Then he got in his car and drove to Billionaire District. Consequences be damned. The neighborhood looked worse in person than in photographs. Graffiti covered every surface in layers of paint and anger. Broken glass littered sidewalks like fallen stars. Sirens wailed in the distance. Imani's building leaned slightly to the left, one good earthquake away from collapse. Windows covered with bars that were supposed to provide security, but looked like prison cells instead. Ji-Hoon parked his Tesla 3 blocks away, not wanting to advertise wealth in a neighborhood where poverty was survival and wealth was target. He walked, hyper-aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways, of being clearly out of place in his tailored suit. He found her apartment by the number painted crookedly beside the door. Rent notices fluttered in the breeze, taped overlapping like desperate pleas. Past due. Final notice. Eviction proceedings to begin. Each one was another failure Ji-Hoon had caused, another consequence of his pride. Through the cracked window, he watched Imani move through the tiny space with practiced efficiency born of necessity. The triplets sat together at a table missing one leg, propped up with books. Caleb and Zuri did homework while Eli colored. The 3 of them shoulder to shoulder in the cramped space. They moved with synchronized efficiency, passing crayons and pencil between them without asking. A unit born of necessity and love. The refrigerator hummed loudly, died with a mechanical cough, then hummed again. Imani smacked it with her palm without looking up from the pot she stirred, the gesture so automatic it was clearly routine. Everything about the scene radiated exhaustion and determination in equal measure. She'd built a life from nothing. She'd raised triplets alone, 3 babies at once. She'd survived 5 years of struggle that Ji-Hoon could barely imagine. And she'd done it all while Ji-Hoon signed business deals worth millions, attended charity galas, lived in a penthouse with more square footage than her entire building. The contrast was obscene. The guilt was crushing. He was about to knock when his phone buzzed. Another text from his assistant, more urgent this time. Your father is looking for you. Board meeting moved up. He's angry. You need to come now. Ji-Hoon stared at the message, then at Imani through the window, then at the triplets huddled together doing homework, then at the message again. 5 years ago, he would have chosen the board meeting without hesitation, would have told himself business came first. Family obligations were paramount. One more delay wouldn't matter. Would have convinced himself that control and success and family approval were worth more than love. But he'd already delayed 5 years. He'd already missed everything that mattered. He'd already chosen wrong once. Ji-Hoon turned off his phone and knocked on the door. The sound of movement inside stopped abruptly, then cautious footsteps. The door opened a crack, chain still attached. Imani's face appeared in the gap, and when she saw him, something cold and hard settled over her features like armor. No. I need to talk to you. The words felt inadequate. I said no. She started to close the door, the movement final. Ji-Hoon put his hand against it, not pushing, just preventing it from shutting completely. Please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. You're not asking. You're demanding. There's a difference. Her voice was flat, exhausted. I don't owe you 5 seconds after what you did. I know you don't owe me anything, but I'm asking anyway. Please. Imani stared at him through the crack, and he watched her calculate, watched her weigh options she shouldn't have to weigh, watched survival instinct war with justified anger. Finally, she spoke. The children are here. The triplets don't need to see this. You don't get to upset them. You don't get to come into their space and bring your drama. I understand. She studied his face for another long moment, then unchained the door and stepped onto the landing, pulling it closed behind her with quiet click. They stood in the narrow hallway, close enough that Ji-Hoon could see the shadows under her eyes, could see exhaustion written in every line of her face, could see the toll 5 years of raising triplets alone had taken. Say what you came to say. Imani said, then leave and don't come back. I want to help. The words were simple, insufficient. No. The refusal was immediate, absolute. Imani, please. I said no. Her voice was flat, final. I don't want your money. I don't want your guilt. I don't want anything from you except distance. What about what the children need? What about the triplets? The question made her flinch, and Ji-Hoon hated himself for using them as leverage, but it was the truth they both had to face. Don't you dare. Imani's voice shook with fury. Don't you dare use my children as manipulation. They're triplets. Do you have any idea how hard it's been? 3 babies at once. I'm not manipulating. I'm stating facts. Ji-Hoon pulled the social services report from his jacket, the pages worn from repeated reading. You're being monitored. You're at risk of losing custody, of having the triplets separated into different foster homes. Let me help. Imani snatched a report, eyes scanning the pages with growing horror and rage. You had me investigated. You had someone dig into my life without permission. I needed to understand what you've been facing, what the triplets need, what I can do to help. What you can do. Her laugh was bitter, broken. You can disappear. That's what you can do. You violated my privacy. You confirmed every terrible thing I thought about you. Imani, this report. She held it up, hand shaking. This says I'm failing. This says I'm not enough. This says that no matter how hard I work, No matter how much I sacrifice, I can't give 3 children what they need. 3 children born at once who need 3 times everything. Her voice cracked. Is that what you came here to prove? That I'm inadequate? That you were right to leave? No. Ji-Hoon stepped closer, desperate to make her understand. It proves you've done the impossible. You've kept triplets alive and healthy, and loved despite having no support. Despite me abandoning you when you were pregnant with a high-risk pregnancy. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met. Strength doesn't pay rent. Imani's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Strength doesn't fix a broken refrigerator or pay for 3 sets of medications or get Caleb the testing he needs for his dyslexia while managing Zuri's anxiety and Eli's asthma. Strength doesn't stop social services from threatening to take my babies and split them up because I can't afford an apartment big enough for triplets. Then let me provide those things. Why? The question was raw, wounded. So you can feel better about yourself? So you can ease your guilt? So you can play savior and then disappear again when you realize how hard raising triplets actually is? Because they're my children. Ji-Hoon's voice broke. Because I owe you 5 years of support. Because I was wrong about everything. And this is the only way I know how to start making it right. You went through a high-risk triplet pregnancy alone. Imani. Alone. You can't make it right. Imani wiped her eyes angrily. You can write checks. You can throw money at problems. But you can't give back the nights I sat up alone terrified I was failing 3 babies at once. You can't give back the birthdays you missed. 3 sets of birthdays. You can't give back the moments when they asked about their father, and I had to lie because the truth was too painful. You can't give back the terror of almost losing them because they were born too early, because the stress of the pregnancy with no support nearly killed us all. I know I can't fix the past. Ji-Hoon's hands clenched at his sides. But I can try to fix the future. I have a property. Silver Cliff Estate. There's a guest house on the grounds, completely separate from the main residence. 3 bedrooms, 1 for each of them. Full kitchen. Private entrance. Space for triplets to actually have room to grow. Stability that would satisfy social services. Imani stared at him. You want me to move triplets into your property? To be dependent on you? To give you control over where we live? No control. The lease would be in your name only. Legally binding. You'd have complete autonomy. Complete privacy. I'd be the landlord on paper only. Nothing more. You could stay as long as you need. The triplets could each have their own room for the first time in their lives. And when you get bored, Imani's voice was hard. When this novelty wears off, and you remember you have a company to run and a fiancée to marry, when you realize that triplets are 3 times the chaos, 3 times the noise, 3 times everything, what happens when you decide this was a mistake? That won't happen. But even as Ji-Hoon said it, he heard the doubt, heard the echo of Yura's words. What makes you think you won't fail them? You don't know that. Imani looked at him with something that might have been pity. You think you want this now. You think guilt and shock make you a father. But when all 3 of them have tantrums at 3 a.m. and you haven't slept in days, when they're fighting with each other and you can't tell them apart, when you have 3 simultaneous meltdowns in public and everyone stares, you'll remember why you never wanted this mess in the first place. I always wanted this. The words came out fierce, desperate. I wanted you. I wanted family. I was just too much of a coward to fight for it when my family pushed back, too proud to question their lies, too controlled to choose love over approval. Imani searched his face for a long moment, and Ji-Hoon let her look. Let her see every crack in his armor, every failure written in his expression. Finally, she spoke. I need to think. I need to see the property. I need the lease reviewed by a lawyer. My lawyer, not yours. Of course, whatever you need. And I need it in writing that you have no authority over me, over the triplets, over any decisions regarding their welfare. No input unless I explicitly ask for it. No control, no manipulation, no using money as leverage. Done. I'll have the documents drawn up. And if there's even a hint of a lie, if you try to control anything, if you use this arrangement to manipulate me or them, I walk. Immediately. No negotiation. No second chances. Her voice was steel. One mistake, and you lose us forever. All four of us. I understand. Ji-Hoon met her eyes. I won't fail you again. I won't fail the triplets. You don't get to make that promise. Imani's expression was hard. You get to prove it, every day, through actions, not words. And if you can't, then at least I'll have stable housing long enough to find something else where the triplets can stay together. She turned to go back inside, then paused. The only reason I'm even considering this is because I'm terrified of losing my children, of having them split up into different foster homes, because no one takes triplets together. Not because I trust you, not because I forgive you, because I'm desperate and you're offering a solution I can't find anywhere else. Remember that. The door closed in his face with quiet finality. Ji-Hoon stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at that closed door, at the rent notices fluttering in the breeze, at the evidence of struggle and survival with triplets. Then he pulled out his phone and started making calls. Lawyers, property managers, contractors to ensure the guest house was perfect for 3 children. If Imani was giving him a chance, even one motivated purely by desperation, he wouldn't waste it. 3 days later, Imani stood in the guest house at Silvercliff Estate with her triplets and tried not to let hope crack her careful armor. The house was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. 3 actual bedrooms, each with closets and windows that let in real light. A kitchen with appliances that worked, that hummed with reliable efficiency instead of dying and restarting. A bathroom with a shower that ha-D water pressure, with hot water that lasted longer than 5 minutes. Living space that didn't require triplets to share a single room, that had space for them to breathe and play and exist as individuals for the first time. The triplets explored together, moving as a unit they'd always been. Caleb walked through the room silently, face carefully neutral, but his eyes were wide as he peered into each bedroom. Zuri pressed her nose against windows, taking in the backyard with trees and grass and space to run. Eli toddled from room to room, saying, "Big, big," with delighted wonder, his voice echoing in spaces that felt impossibly large compared to their apartment. His siblings followed close behind, the 3 of them never straying far from each other. Ji-Hoon waited on the porch like he'd promised, giving them privacy, giving them space to decide without his presence as pressure. Imani had insisted on that condition, and he'd agreed without argument. No pressure, no presence, just the house and the choice. She found him 20 minutes later, stepping onto the porch while the triplets continued exploring their potential new rooms, their excited voices carrying through the windows. The lease? On the kitchen table. Your lawyer can review it. Take as long as you need. And it's really in my name? No caveats? No fine print. Completely in your name. You'd be a legal tenant with full rights. I'd be the landlord in paperwork only. No authority over you, over the triplets, over anything. It's all documented. Imani pulled out her phone and called her lawyer right there, putting her on speaker. Spent 15 minutes going through the lease line by line, while Ji-Hoon stood silent, never interrupting, never defending, just letting the lawyer examine every clause and condition. When they finished, the lawyer said, "It's clean, Imani, completely clean. Better terms than most rentals I've seen. 3 bedrooms for the price of a studio apartment. Security deposit waived. First month free. Maintenance included. I don't see any traps or hidden conditions." "You're sure?" Imani's voice was tight. "I've been doing this for 15 years. This lease is airtight in your favor. If anything, it's too generous. He's giving you every protection possible. And 3 separate bedrooms for the triplets? That alone is worth more than the stated rent." "Thank you," Imani said quietly and hung up. She looked at Ji-Hoon, really looked at him, trying to see past the guilt and the desperation to whatever truth lived underneath. "Why are you doing this?" "Because they're my children. Because I owe you 5 years of support I should have been providing all along. Support for triplets, which should have been 3 times what any single parent gets. This doesn't fix what you did." Her voice was hard. "I know. And this doesn't mean I forgive you. This doesn't mean we're anything except 2 people sharing property for our children's sake. I know that too." Imani took a breath, looked at the house, looked at her triplets visible through the windows. 3 identical faces pressed against the glass, watching her with hope, looked at the social services report she'd folded and unfolded so many times the creases had started to tear. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." Ji-Hoon's voice was careful, like he didn't quite believe it. "We'll take it, on my terms, with my conditions. And if you violate even one of them, we leave immediately. All 4 of us. No discussion. No negotiation. Understood completely." Imani nodded once, sharp and final. Then she went inside to tell the triplets they were moving, to give them the news that would change everything while trying not to think about what it meant to accept help from the man who destroyed her. The move happened on a Saturday morning. Professional movers Ji-Hoon had hired packed Imani's apartment in 4 hours, careful with the few precious things she owned, treating her second-hand furniture like it mattered. The triplets watched together, staying close to each other throughout. Caleb stood with his small arms crossed over his chest, analyzing every movement like he was looking for threats or deception, while Zuri clung to his arm and Eli held Zuri's hand. They formed a protective triangle, the way they always did when uncertain. They tried to help by dragging stuffed animals toward boxes, 3 children creating 3 times the chaos, leaving trails of plush toys everywhere, but working together with surprising coordination. Ji-Hoon stayed in the background throughout, present but not intrusive, available but not controlling. When the movers finished loading the truck, Imani took one last look at the apartment that had been too small for 4 people, especially when 3 of them were growing children who needed space. Too cold, too expensive, but it had been home, had been the place where she brought her triplets home from the NICU, where she'd survived their terrible 2s times 3, where she'd built a life from nothing. She locked the door and didn't look back, refusing to let herself feel anything except determination. At Silvercliff Estate, the triplets exploded into their new space with energy that only the very young possess, but they stayed together, exploring as a unit. Caleb claimed the largest bedroom immediately, but then hesitated. "Can we share?" he asked his mother quietly. "You don't have to," Imani said gently. "You each get your own room." The triplets looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations that happened without words. Finally, Zuri spoke. "We want to try, but can we keep our doors open?" "Of course, baby." Imani's voice was thick. They'd never had the option of their own space before. The triplets discovered the backyard together and started cataloging trees. As a team, Caleb naming them with practical names, while Zuri assigned them personalities, and Eli just ran between them laughing. They found the bathtub, and all three demanded to play in it at once. Their excitement over simple things like water pressure and hot water breaking Imani's heart into pieces. Imani stood in the middle of the living room and felt the weight of 5 years lift just slightly, just enough to breathe deeper than she had in memory. "Thank you," she said to Ji-Hoon without looking at him. The words difficult but necessary. "You're welcome." His voice was quiet, careful. "This doesn't change anything between us." She needed him to understand that, needed the boundary clear. "I know. I'm serious. This is for them. For the triplets. Not for us. We're not rebuilding anything. We're not becoming a family. We're two people sharing property so our children have stability and can stay together. I understand." Imani finally turned to face him. "So, why you look like you just won something?" Ji-Hoon considered lying, considered deflecting with corporate politeness. But Imani had always been able to see through his bullshit, and apparently 5 years hadn't changed that. Because the triplets are safe. Because you don't have to sleep tonight worrying about eviction notices or broken refrigerators or social services taking them and splitting them up. Because for the first time in 5 years, I'm actually doing something right instead of just destroying things. Because those 3 children have their own rooms and enough space to be individuals instead of just the triplets. The honesty clearly surprised her. Imani's expression flickered through several emotions, surprise and suspicion, and something that might have been grudging respect, before settling on cautious. "Don't get used to being thanked." Wasn't planning on it. They stood in awkward silence until all 3 triplets came barreling out of the bathroom, soaking wet and laughing hysterically, water dripping everywhere. Imani sighed and went to collect her children, plural, always 3 at once. Ji-Hoon watched them go and allowed himself the dangerous luxury of hope. The first week was careful, both of them navigating new boundaries with the caution of people walking through a minefield. Ji-Hoon stayed in the main house and resisted every impulse to cross the property line uninvited, to check on them, to insert himself into their lives. He watched from a distance as Imani got the triplets enrolled in better schools with actual resources and qualified teachers. Schools equipped to handle siblings who looked identical and sometimes pretended to be each other. Watched her set up her catering equipment in the guest house kitchen, building her business with the same determination she brought to everything. Watched her build routines that looked almost normal, almost stable. On the 8th day, all 3 triplets knocked on the main house door together. Ji-Hoon opened it to find them standing in formation, Caleb in front, Zuri and Eli flanking him. Caleb held a school form clutched in one hand, suspicion written all over his face while his siblings watched with wide, identical eyes. "Mom says we have to get this signed by both parents for the field trip." Caleb thrust the paper at him, like it might burn. "Are you really our father?" The question was direct, challenging, delivered with the bluntness of a 4-year-old who'd learned not to trust easy answers, while 2 other identical faces waited for the response. Ji-Hoon took the form carefully, acutely aware of 3 pairs of eyes watching him. "Yes, I am. I'm father to all 3 of you. Why didn't you come before?" "Before we moved here?" "Before everything," Caleb demanded while his siblings pressed closer. "Because I didn't know you existed. Any of you. If I had known, if I'd had any idea there were 3 of you." "Mom says you left her." Caleb's eyes, so eerily like June's own, were hard and judging. "She says you believed lies about her instead of asking for the truth." Zuri nodded solemnly beside her brother, while Eli just stared with those impossibly large eyes. "Your mother is right." The admission felt like swallowing glass, made worse by having to say it to 3 children at once. "I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake of my life. Sorry doesn't fix it. Caleb's voice was flat absolute, and his siblings nodded in unison. No, Ji-Hoon agreed, kneeling down to eye level so he could meet all three gazes directly. It doesn't, but I'm here now, and I'm going to keep being here, every single day, for all three of you, for as long as you'll let me. The triplets looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations. Finally, Caleb spoke for all of them. We don't trust you. That's fair. That's completely fair. And if you hurt our mom again, if you make her cry like she used to, we'll make you regret it. The threat from 3-4-year-olds should have been meaningless, but something fierce in their identical expressions made it real. Something that might have been pride swelled in Ji-Hoon's chest, painful and unexpected. His children, protective and fierce and loyal, united as one. I believe you, all of you, and I promise I'll do everything I can to earn your trust. Caleb snatched the sign form, and the triplets walked away together without another word, leaving Ji-Hoon kneeling on his porch. He watched his three children go and thought maybe, possibly, he'd just passed the first test. The second test came from Zuri 2 days later, though she brought her brothers with her for backup. All three appeared in the main house kitchen, while Ji-Hoon was attempting breakfast, and attempting was definitely the operative word. Smoke poured from the toaster, where bread had gone from brown to black. Eggs congealed in the pan into something that looked more like rubber than food. Coffee burbled over the rim of the pot, creating a growing puddle. The triplets climbed onto stools in synchronized movement and watched the disaster with 3 pairs of solemn dark eyes that seemed to see everything. You're doing it wrong, Zuri announced with 4-year-old certainty while her brothers nodded agreement. Ji-Hoon shut off the burner before the fire alarm could trigger and make this worse. I'm aware. Mom makes eggs differently, Caleb added. She uses butter first. And she doesn't burn them black. Eli contributed, his small voice serious. Your mother is more talented than me in basically every way. Is that why you left her? Zuri asked, the question delivered so casually, with such childlike innocence, that it took Ji-Hoon a moment to process what she'd asked. The triplets waited, 3 identical faces, showing 3 degrees of curiosity. Then it hit like a physical blow. No, I left because I was stupid and afraid, and I let other people control my decisions. The triplets considered this seriously, their faces thoughtful. Caleb says you believe bad people instead of Mom. Zuri continued while her brothers nodded. He says you chose wrong. Caleb is right about that. Why would you do that? Why would you believe bad people? Eli asked, and hearing the question from his youngest made it somehow worse. Because I thought I knew better. Because I let fear make me cruel. Because I didn't understand that love means trusting someone even when it's hard, even when other people tell you not to. June sat down across from them, facing 3 children instead of 1, and because I didn't have the courage your mother has, the courage to raise 3 babies at once alone. Oh! The triplets swung their legs back and forth in unison, thinking together. Do you love Mom? Zuri asked while her brothers leaned forward expectantly. The question was a landmine disguised as innocent curiosity, now asked by 3 children waiting for his answer. I did. Once. Very much. But not anymore? Her eyes were wide, searching, flanked by 2 other pairs equally intent. I don't know if I have the right to anymore. I hurt her very badly. Love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make to be there for someone, and I made the wrong choice. That's a weird answer, Zuri said matter-of-factly. If you loved her before, you should love her again. That's how it works in stories, Caleb added. Grown-ups make things complicated. Eli finished. The triplets hopped down from their stools with decisive movement, still in formation. But really you just make it complicated when it doesn't have to be, they seemed to say collectively as they left. They skipped out together before Ji-Hoon could respond, leaving him alone with burnt breakfast and the devastating emotional clarity that triplets possessed. Their ability to cut through complexity to simple truth multiplied by 3. The third test came from Eli, but it affected all 3 of them, and it was the one that broke Ji-Hoon completely, that shattered every defense he'd built. One morning, Ji-Hoon was working in his home office, reviewing contracts that suddenly seemed meaningless, when he felt small hands tugging at his sleeve with persistent gentleness. He looked down to find Eli staring up at him with enormous eyes, innocent and trusting, while Caleb and Zuri hung back by the door, watching. "Hi," Ji-Hoon said carefully, uncertain how to interact with triplets who were learning to be individuals. Eli didn't respond with words, just raised his arms in a universal gesture for up, the request simple and trusting. Ji-Hoon hesitated for only a second, then lifted the boy into his lap, careful and uncertain. Eli settled against his chest like he'd been doing his whole life, like this was natural and right, thumb going into his mouth, body relaxing immediately with complete trust. Then Caleb stepped forward hesitantly. "Can we?" He gestured at the space beside Ji-Hoon. "Of course." Ji-Hoon's voice was rough. Caleb climbed into the chair beside him, leaning carefully against his side. Zuri followed, taking the space on his other side, and suddenly Ji-Hoon was surrounded by triplets. 3 small, warm bodies pressed against him with varying degrees of trust and uncertainty. Ji-Hoon sat frozen, terrified to move and break whatever spell had made this possible, this moment of acceptance from all 3 children at once. His children's heartbeats pressed against his ribs through thin fabric. 3 rhythms slightly out of sync, warm and alive and real, and right there. These were his children, his blood, his responsibility, his triplets. And for their entire lives, Ji-Hoon hadn't even known they existed, had been living in ignorant comfort while 3 children grew and learned and existed without a father, while they formed their tight unit out of necessity, because he wasn't there. The weight of that failure sat crushing in his chest as their breathing evened out, as 3 sets of small fingers curled into his shirt with unconscious trust. Ji-Hoon worked one-handed for the next hour, typing emails with his free hand while triplets draped across him like living blankets, this collective small warm weight that felt like the most important thing in the world. When Imani came looking for her children, she stopped in the doorway and stared, expression unreadable. 3 children, her 3 children, all piled on their father like they belonged there. "They escaped," she said quietly, voice thick. "I noticed." They looked at each other across the office, and something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but maybe the smallest seed of possibility, the faintest hint that maybe, possibly, things could be different. "Don't get used to it," Imani said, but her voice had lost some of its sharp edge, some of its defensive armor. She didn't make them leave, didn't demand her triplets back, just turned and walked away, leaving Ji-Hoon holding their sleeping children and trying to remember how to breathe around the impossible weight of love and responsibility, and 5 years of failure multiplied by 3. Dinner happened by accident the first time. Ji-Hoon had planned to eat alone like he had every night, but Zuri knocked on his door asking if he had any salt. Then Caleb appeared looking for a pencil sharpener for homework. Then Eli toddled over for no reason except proximity and curiosity. Then Imani showed up to collect her triplets and found them all in Ji-Hoon's dining room, somehow having collectively decided dinner was happening. "We're having pasta," Zuri announced with authority, while her brothers nodded enthusiastically. "The kind with cheese that Mom makes." Imani looked at Ji-Hoon. He looked back, both of them uncertain. "There's plenty," he said carefully, not wanting to pressure, not wanting to push. "If you want to stay." She should have said no, should have collected her triplets and maintained the boundaries they'd established. But Ji-Hoon saw the exhaustion in her face, the way her shoulders sagged after another 12-hour day of rebuilding her catering business from almost nothing. Saw her look at the table where the triplets sat comfortably, arguing over napkins like they belonged there, the three of them filling the space with noise and life. "Just this once," Imani said, her voice quiet. She sat at the far end of the table, as distant from Ji-Hoon as physically possible while still technically eating the same meal. But she stayed, and that felt like progress even though neither of them acknowledged it. Dinner was chaotic in the way only triplets can create. Eli threw noodles with gleeful enthusiasm, somehow getting them in everyone's hair, while Caleb and Zuri joined in until it became a pasta fight that coated everything. The triplets narrated events in overlapping voices. Zuri describing something that happened at school, Caleb correcting her version, Eli adding details that might or might not have been real. They watched Ji-Hoon like three hawks throughout, analyzing every word and gesture for signs of deception or weakness or ulterior motives, their identical faces showing slightly different degrees of suspicion. And Imani said almost nothing, eating mechanically while her triplets filled the silence with 3 times the noise and life and energy. At one point, Ji-Hoon tried to teach them how to count to 10 in Korean, the words feeling strange in his mouth after years of using only English. The triplets repeated the words in unison, their voices blending and diverging, stumbling on different numbers, then competing to see who could say them correctly first. 3 children learning their heritage together, correcting each other, laughing when Eli mixed up 8 and 9 completely. Imani watched her triplets embrace this small piece of heritage they'd never known, and something complicated moved across her face. Pride mixed with grief, joy tangled with pain, hope fighting with fear. When dinner ended, all 3 triplets cleared plates without being asked, moving with the efficient coordination of children who'd learned to work as a team. They helped wipe the table with more enthusiasm than actual skill, creating new messes while cleaning old ones, getting in each other's way, but somehow making it work. And Imani stood at the sink washing dishes beside Ji-Hoon in silence that felt less hostile than it had a week ago, less sharp with immediate anger. Their hands brushed reaching for the same pan, and both of them froze. "Sorry," Ji-Hoon said quietly. "It's fine." Imani scrubbed the pan with unnecessary force, her movements tight. "This doesn't mean anything, though. You understand that, right?" "I know. I'm not forgiving you. I'm not forgetting what you did, what you put me through with the triplets. I know. I'm just tired. And this is easier for the kids. For all 3 of them. That's all this is." "I understand," Ji-Hoon said, meaning it. They finished the dishes without speaking again. When Imani collected her children to leave, Caleb asked, "Can we eat here again tomorrow?" while his siblings nodded hopefully. Imani's jaw tightened visibly. "We'll see." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Ji-Hoon watched them cross back to the guest house through the darkness. For silhouettes, 1 tall and 3 small, the triplets staying close together the way they always did, and allowed himself to hope that maybe, possibly, he was building something real. The second dinner happened 3 days later, then another 2 days after that. Then they started happening with increasing frequency until it became a routine neither of them acknowledged out loud, neither of them named or claimed. Imani would show up with her triplets around 6 p.m. They'd eat together. The kids would do homework at Ji-Hoon's table because it was bigger and sturdier and had better light. The 3 of them spread out with more space than they'd ever had. Then they'd leave, small and fragile and terrifyingly important. Ji-Hoon learned things during those dinners, small details that built into understanding. Learned that Caleb liked math but struggled with reading, his fierce intelligence hampered by dyslexia no one had diagnosed because his previous school didn't have resources for proper testing of triplets. Learned that Zuri told elaborate stories about imaginary friends who had complex backstories and emotional arcs that would put novels to shame, while Caleb provided logical critiques and Eli acted them out. Learned that Eli was terrified of the dark, but wouldn't admit it, preferring to simply not sleep rather than confess fear or weakness, though his siblings always knew and stayed close. Learned that the triplets had developed their own language of looks and gestures, communicating without words in ways that excluded everyone else. Learned that Imani still took her coffee black, with 1 sugar, still hummed unconsciously while she cooked, still laughed at terrible puns, even when she tried not to. She was exactly the woman he remembered and completely different, hardened by survival, softened by motherhood, still devastatingly beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance and everything to do with strength that showed in how she moved through the world, strength that kept 3 children alive and together. One night, after the triplets had gone to bed, Imani lingered on the porch. She did that sometimes now, staying just a few extra minutes, as if reluctant to end the evening, as if something kept her there. "They're getting attached," she said without looking at him, staring out at the darkness. "All 3 of them. I know. That scares me. Terrifies me, actually. I know that too." Imani turned to face him, and in the porch light he saw fear written clearly in her expression. What happens when you get bored? When this novelty wears off, and you remember you have an empire to run, and a fiancé to marry, and a life that doesn't include us? That won't happen. The words came out fierce. "You don't know that. You can't promise that." Her voice shook. "You think you want this now. But when it gets hard, when all 3 of them have tantrums at 3 a.m., and you haven't slept in days, when they're fighting with each other and you can't tell them apart because they do it on purpose, when you have 3 simultaneous meltdowns in the grocery store and everyone stares, when you realize that triplets are 3 times everything, 3 times a mess, 3 times the cost, 3 times the chaos, you'll remember why you never wanted this mess in the first place. "I always wanted this," Ji-Hoon said quietly, and meant it with everything in him. "I wanted you. I wanted a family. I wanted all of it. I was just too much of a coward to fight for it when my family pushed back. Too proud to question their lies. Too controlled by fear of disappointing them to choose love. And now I have 3 children. Triplets. 3 chances to get it right. 3 reasons to be better." Imani stared at him, searching his face in the dim light. "I don't believe you." "Then watch me prove it. Every day, with all 3 of them, however long it takes. And if you can't, if you fail again, then you leave, just like you said. No questions, no arguments. All 4 of you." Imani searched his face for a long moment, looking for deception or manipulation or hidden agenda. Then she walked away without another word, leaving Ji-Hoon alone on the porch. But she came back the next night, and the night after that, and slowly, carefully, something began to build between them. Not love, not yet, but maybe the foundation for it someday. Maybe the possibility that broken things could be repaired if you were patient enough and honest enough and willing to do the work. And Ji-Hoon was willing. After 5 years of failure, after destroying everything that mattered, after nearly losing his triplets forever, 3 children he never knew existed, he was finally willing to fight for what mattered, even if it took the rest of his life, even if Imani never forgave him. Even if all he ever got was these dinners and these moments and the privilege of being present for 3 children who looked at him with identical eyes. It was more than he deserved, and it was everything he needed. Before we wrap up, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know what you think. Where are you watching from? What would you do in Ji-Hoon's situation? And don't forget to like this video, because there's one final lesson here about redemption that you need to hear. The real test wasn't the dinners or the learning to be a father to triplets or even moving them into his property. The real test came when his past showed up to demand payment for his choices. And this is a story that proves whether Ji-Hoon was truly willing to sacrifice everything or whether this was all just another performance. Because redemption isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up every single day, even when it's hard, even when it costs everything.